All right, let's do it. From ESPN PTI fame, one of our favorites, the great Michael Wilbon, is joining us here on WBH Radio. How are you, sir?
William, I'm good this evening. I'm pretty good on this playoff weekend. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Thank you so much. Mr. Wilbon, I want to talk about your career as a writer a little bit. Okay. I enjoy going back and reading the work of some of our favorite television personalities. If there was one piece from your career that highlights Mike Wilbon or epitomizes Mike Wilbon, the writer, what piece would that be?
Oh, my goodness. You asked me to go back over too many years now. I can barely remember what I wrote. I mean, maybe the last one, December 7, 2010, was my last column. Not the last thing I've written, because I've obviously in the last 13 years, but that was the last column I wrote for the Washington Post. And in it, I tried to sort of what I'd done and thank people for putting up with it for years, decades. And so that piece of things probably was revealing, you know, in terms of what I believe in, what I think about sports in general, what I think about the profession, why it's important to me, you know, probably revealed a little bit of myself in that. But I don't know, there's just too many. There's just too many pieces over the years that are, some of them are personal.
Yes.
Dealing with, you know, who I rooted for and why. Some of them dealt with life and death and, you know, moments.
Yes. Mr. Wilbon, why is the profession so important to you?
Because storytelling is important to me. That's what that's my love. Mm-hmm. You know, I got into this to be in storytelling, and even though it's morphed and it's gone from writing, as you have started me off talking about, to mostly overwhelmingly talking.
Yeah,
it's still storytelling. No matter what the platform is, no matter what the, you know, genre is, it's still storytelling. So that's why it matters to me more than the games. You know, it's the storytelling that is the first thing. It could be about war or fashion or music or the arts or culture, or sports, but it's the storytelling that's important to me.
I have been checking out the PTI 20th anniversary special over the last couple of days. I listened to the podcast also in anticipation, in preparation for this interview. And one thing that was funny is you and Mr. Kornheiser, there was a clip when you said, Tony doesn't really talk to anybody in the beginning. And in the very next clip, Mr. Kornheiser said, I love Wilbon from the beginning. Early on, he used to kind of needle you a little bit in his own articles, but you would ultimately say, hey, he was kind of raising my stock.
Oh, yeah, no question. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He was setting up, you know, he was setting up in print a relationship that most people think came about in broadcast. It didn't. That relationship and the back and forth and the needling, that was created by Tony. I wasn't a columnist then.
Yeah.
So I didn't even it wasn't equal. He created that. He explained to people what they thought were the differences between us, even though there were way more similarities probably. Tony illuminated those and brought people to the relationship between two columnists at the Washington Post. And again, I got even two columnists at the beginning. He was the columnist, right. I was a reporter. Right. And that's why it worked, really. You could have one person doing this who could poke fun at himself and at me. And it worked. It worked. You know, he definitely raised my stock in doing it.
It worked indeed, and that chemistry is something that we watch play out on TV every day. Those early days, transitioning to television, what was the hardest part for you?
Learning how to find your voice in each medium is a little different, William. I mean, in radio, it's different than television. In television, it's way different. And both of those is way different than newspaper. It's just how to communicate, how to keep an audience, how to appeal to that audience. Appealing to a radio audience is different than appealing to a television audience, to a newspaper, a magazine audience. and I worked for all of them, and loved working for all of them. But it is a transition there. How to write for them, how to speak for them and to them, very different.
What was the fairest bit of criticism you received in those early days, and who did it come from?
Well, I tell a story about how when I first started writing a column, I would write on Saturday for Saturday newspaper. The least read newspaper was the Saturday newspaper, and George Solomon, my sports editor, my mentor, my dear friend now of all these decades, George allowed me to write a column when I was in my late 20s, 28, 29, 30 years old. But he would put those columns often on Saturday morning where you have, you feel like, not that you can mess up, but you've got less a spotlight on you than if you're writing for the Sunday newspaper, which would have been like 3 times as many people. I mean, the readership of the Washington Post on football Sunday in the 1980s would have been like 1.5 million. And Saturday might have been, I don't know, 400,000 or 500,000, maybe more than that, but maybe certainly half. And I used to write on Saturday, and Ralph Wiley, the great Ralph Wiley, friend and mentor, writing then for Sports Illustrated, knowing what was at stake for the handful of Black columnists in America at the time. I'm talking about handful. I'm talking about 4 or 5, maybe not even that, maybe 3. And Terrence Moore, Brian Burwell, Roy Johnson, me. That's it. And all of us might not have been writing a column at the same time then. But Ralph Wiley would pick up the phone, read my Saturday morning column, and he would call my home phone back when there was tape. It wasn't digital. It was tape. This is the early 90s or late 80s. And Ralph would leave a critique of my columns that might last like 8 minutes. I mean, it would like run out the tape. And I'm like, I didn't ask for this. Who is dude to just be bleeding all this red ink and criticism on my column? And it tests your self-esteem. And what Ralph was doing, of course, without being asked or prompted, he was going to take it upon himself as like the dean of us to say, okay, you got this column, you got this opportunity, you're gonna be good at this. You're gonna be good at this, or else we're gonna die trying to make you that. And I used to first dread answering the phone or get my phone messages on Saturday. And then as I got, a year or so into it, I would look forward with great anticipation to hearing what Ralph had to say, understanding that there would be criticism. There might be some praise, but the criticism was more valuable than the praise.
Right.
And so I have a debt I can never, ever, ever, ever repay to the great Ralph Wiley for helping me find my voice, find out how to tell the story in column form as a 28, 29-year-old, 30-year-old journalist, columnist for the Washington Post on that stage that big and daunting. And it was important to get it right. We couldn't afford to have, I mentioned to you the people who wrote columns then, the Black columnists in sports. It's a handful.
Yeah.
And all those people were successful, and we really couldn't afford somebody to butcher it. And Ralph Wiley wasn't about to allow that.
Mr. Wilbon, you talk about the dearth of Black writers, and that continues on the television screen also. And when certain topics come up that are like Black topics, and the whole world is waiting to hear from people like you and Stephen A. Smith and Charles Barkley, I sit back and I wonder, like, how fair is that to you guys? There is no one Black voice. Like, to carry that weight and that responsibility, like, what's that like?
Yeah. There's no fair.
Yeah.
I don't even wait for that. There's no point in it. And I form opinions about almost everything anyway, whether they are thought of by the audience as a Black topic or not. It's great you said that. There's no one voice. As anybody can see from, just any countdown show, Stephen A. and I disagreeing. What's the one voice? Where is it? There isn't. And I never waited for it to be fair. That's a great question. Just it isn't going to be. I'm not waiting for it. It's not going to happen, nor should it, nor is there any interest in me for me in trying to find out what that means. You weigh in on topics of all kinds, no matter who you are, no matter what you look like. And that was not done easily 30 years ago,
right,
when I first started doing this 35 years ago. But people got used to it. People had to get used to it. People weren't, reading particularly is habitual. And so people weren't used to know anybody who looked like me telling them what to think
yes, sir.
about a team or a player or a game or an issue, labor or management, MVP or runner-up. People weren't used to anybody who looked like me telling them what to think about that. And that's one of the things that changed in the late 80s and early 90s, but not until then. And people like Ralph and Roy Johnson, who were just a little bit older than me, had it tougher than me because there was nobody before them. At least I have those guys as sort of as guideposts. They didn't have that.
Yeah, when I sit back and I watch and I'm looking at the Twitter sphere, go back and forth about your opinion, and I'm like, I just hope they're okay. You know what I'm saying? I just hope this is a lot of responsibility, people raining down on them. Like you said,
I don't pay any attention to that, and I would encourage anybody who does this for a living. I pay no attention. I haven't looked at Twitter on what somebody thinks about my column. I haven't looked at it in years. Don't find it necessary. If I need to get feedback, there are a lot more responsible places I can do it.
Yes, sir.
And a lot more productive places than social media. So I don't ever.
Mr. Wilbon, with this anniversary special, they talked about Mike Wilbon was one of the most well-sourced individuals in the country. How did it come to be that you were one of the most well-sourced? How did you go about formulating these sources, or cultivating rather?
Well, being a reporter for the Washington Post, there was no other way. I have a problem with people who are just expressing opinions who have not sort of been apprentices, have not worked at that level. I don't really know if I trust their voices. I don't know if I trust their way of expressing opinion, of convincing you what to believe. Ultimately, column writing is me trying to convince you of what I believe. And I don't know if I trust them. Like, what are their sources? Who are their sources? How did they get them? I did it for the Washington Post, so I did it under that banner. I did it on that brand, one of the great brands of information and reporting in the history of information and reporting. So, I got the Good Housekeeping stamp of approval from, to me, the best and most important newspaper of its time. So that it's that simple. I did things, there are two institutions that fully formed who I am as a former journalist. I'm not a journalist anymore. They fully formed me. Medill School of Journalism in Northwestern, the best institution of its kind, and the Washington Post, the best institution of its kind. And I know the New York Times would want to argue with that, and fairly so. And so would the LA Times and maybe Boston Globe and Wall Street Journal. But it's a handful. It's only a handful.
Yeah. And
I am grateful to have been shaped and educated and shaped by those institutions. Everything I believe was formed by those institutions.
Excellent. Mr. Wilbon, were you able to catch Charles Barkley's segment on 60 Minutes recently?
I did see it.
How surprised are you that his relationship with Michael Jordan has been fractured for over 10 years now? How long?
Well, I'm not surprised because I know about it each step of the way. It's not like those guys are not, casually known to me.
Yeah.
What they think, what they feel, their personal lives. I mean, that's why I've long since I'm not a journalist anymore. And so, they're friends, both of them, each of them.
Yes.
And so I'm very familiar. I'm disappointed it's gone on this long, and I've tried to bridge it, but I haven't been able to do that. But I love them both, and I hope it can be bridged. I don't care who does it. I just hope it can be. So am I surprised? No, I know. I'm in the middle of the discussions, so I'm pretty familiar.
For those who don't know, Michael Jordan was a little bit upset about something Charles Barkley said publicly on a radio station years ago. Mr. Wilbon, how do you balance doing your job, going on the television screen, giving strong opinions, and balancing your relationships with the athletes, with the people in sport?
You do it all the time. You do that. That's part of what growing up in the business does. And at first, it's more difficult. As you get more comfortable in your own skin about how you're reporting something and how you're conducting relationships, and people understanding that what you do is more important to you than what they do. Mm-hmm. Like, this is, my work and my ethics, my sense of fairness, and I don't always get it right. Mm-hmm. We don't always get it right. No journalist always gets it right. So, those things evolve over time. Mm-hmm. And they were very different at 21 years old and 27 years old and 35 years old and 50 years old and 64 years old. Very different, very, very different. Mm-hmm. And they evolve. And your ability to deal with news sources evolves. Mm-hmm. And so I'm no different I'm sure than any journalist, veteran reporter, veteran columnist, opinion maker, who has to, sort of navigate that territory.
Recently, it came out that Michael Jordan may be looking to sell the Hornets. Mr. Wilbon, as I do a podcast, I try to look at things from many different angles, consider all the information, but I keep coming back to the same thing. Like, is it possible that the great Michael Jordan is quitting?
I don't think selling your business for 7 times what you paid for it is quitting. I mean, that's what's called investing to me. Yeah. Now, if you're just looking at the athletic part of it, okay, but that's not what any owner of any franchise is just looking at. I mean, I think he paid less than $300 million, or about, let's say he paid $300 million. Let's say he did. I'm not sure of the numbers, but let's just say I'm in the ballpark. Let's say he paid about $300 million, and then he's got, he's going to wind up selling for $2.5 billion. Right. I mean, I don't see that as quitting at all. I would, trust me, if that happens, I will call and congratulate him.
No, because we see a lot of these owners try to hang on to these teams. It's the power. Daniel.
Well, but that's at a different. Not at these prices. I mean, yeah, people want to hang on if they're viable, if they're making money, and if it depends on what kind of market they're in. Yeah. But we just saw a forced sale essentially in Washington. Yes. Where that owner paid $800 million and wound up getting $6.1 billion. So again, a 700%, 7 times the investment. Mm-hmm. So no, I mean, there's, this is not just about, it is sport because they're competitive people, mm-hmm. but there's so much to it. There's so much more to it than that, and it better be. And we as a people have to look at this as what it is. Okay. Business at the highest level, a level that we don't have many people operating at. Yes. Very few. So Bob Johnson did it. Michael Jordan's done it. Magic's done it. I mean, and we have a handful. You can count on one hand. Mm-hmm. This is a level of business that transcends sports. I mean, yeah, it's linked with sports, but it transcends.
All right. Mr. Wilbon, is baseball, that was your first love, right?
Yep.
I grew up cheering for black baseball players, Kenny Lofton, Ken Griffey, Barry Bonds. We don't seem to have too many today. Is that a problem? Or what impact do you think that's going to have, I guess, on society in the next few years?
None. Because, I grew up cheering for Willie Mays and Ernie Banks and Henry Aaron. And did it have any negative impact on me? No. Would I like to see more? Yes. And remember, I won't say black players. I'm going to say African American players. Okay. Hold on. Sarah, do we need to go 95? No. they're players of color.
Yeah.
Obviously you got everybody from Cuba to Venezuela to Dominican to, baseball's an international sport. So I'm not going to confuse today's baseball with 1945 because it isn't. And it doesn't mean, and if African American kid, nobody's banning African American kids from baseball.
Right.
African American kids are self-selecting into basketball and football overwhelmingly. But, that's on us. Mm-hmm. And I would say that we need to make sure our interests remain diverse.
Mr. Wilbon, how are those AAU weekends with your young son?
They're instructive.
Yeah, what are you learning?
They're full of smaller towns and, motels and diners. And, you learn about you're reminded, in my case, of how important things are to kids and what you found important your whole life. I grew up with baseball like that for me. It's baseball for me. It wasn't AAU back then, but, it was still playing. It was getting on a bus. Parents didn't drive to see their kids everywhere. Mm-hmm. My parents never saw me play a high school baseball game. I take that back. My mother saw me play one, the morning after prom, because she had to drive me. My father, who was hands-on involved every day of my life, never saw me play a high school baseball game. Mm. He couldn't. He had to work. Yeah. That's not the world we live in anymore. Two parents are at the games. I'm like, what, and you really better be, or people will make you feel bad. Yeah. And it's too bad. It's too bad. I mean, but I learned, about what's important. Adults have ruined youth sports, where kids can't play more than one now because you got to concentrate on one sport and go to the off-season training and practice every day. We played every sport growing up. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I think that people get injured in the ways they do now. Right. Kids get Tommy John because they weren't also quarterbacks and point guards and, whatever else that you played at the time, horseshoes. Played every sport there is. Mm-hmm. Played everything. The notion that I wasn't going to play a sport because I had to practice in the off season for one of them, that's a sin, actually. It's a sin against children. Yeah. And we got nobody but ourselves to play. Yeah, yeah.
When I see some of these headlines, AAU basketball, always talking about the unsavory characters that are hanging around these places, the sneaker execs and stuff. And a few years ago, there was a whole big shakeup with college basketball. A few people got arrested. Rick Pitino was fired. Yeah. But now he's right back in the Big East at St. John's. What are we supposed to do with situations like that? In that case, a whole bunch of black lower level executives went to jail, and it seemed like the head coaches went on unscathed. And here's Rick Pitino in the Big East with a big time job.
Yeah, I don't know that I mean the person who has functioned as the bag man has always been at greater risk, right? Yeah. Boss man has been at less risk. I don't know that I get particularly. People know what they're doing. Yeah. They know what they're doing when they're doing it. And if they choose to, okay. And there might be consequences. And I don't really have a lot of sympathy for the people who come out on the short end of that because they were on the small end, the beginning of the process. So it's not something that preoccupies me. Okay. I found that episode of it, by the way, did that because I know guys who were checked out by the FBI. Yeah, I know them. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, you know what? You knew what you were doing. What are you doing? You chose to do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not outraged. Do I think you have to be vigilant if you're a parent? Hell yeah. That's your job as a parent to be vigilant. That's my job. But I'm not expecting other people to do that for me. Fair enough.
Mr. Wilbon, I'll let you go on this one, but it's a long one. You've co-written 2 books with the great Charles Barkley. You have a book coming out this summer with the great Chris Paul. What is that process like, co-writing with these athletes? And have you ever considered writing your own book? And what would the title be?
I've considered it and dismissed it. It's too hard. My memory's not good enough. So I've literally dismissed it, even though people try to talk me into it. And the people that are relevant to my story, they're not relevant to the people who would be reading it. I would want 15, 18, and 21-year-olds to read it. They don't care. They're not interested in Michael Jordan and Julius Erving and Larry Bird and Magic. I mean, on some level, like, they're museum pieces. They don't really identify. We don't get to, in 5 years, they won't even, Kobe will be in that previous group.
You're right.
Not the group now. So, and I didn't spend as much time with LeBron, and this generation that is now, even there, LeBron's been around 20 years, almost 40 years old. In 10 years, LeBron's going to be in that previous group.
Yes, sir. So
it's a short shelf life. I have no interest in, I'm not going to try to tell a story to update it to make it include, Ja Morant. I don't know Ja Morant. Ja Morant's young enough to be my grandson. I don't know Ja Morant. And so I have no. So no for me. And with those guys you mentioned, look, those are two of those are like, that's a blessing. They're just not more observant, insightful, engaging people than Charles Barkley and Chris Paul. I mean, there's a group of people like that. Like, if I had a chance to write a book with Grant Hill, is what I've done. Yes. If I've been an editor for Grant, would I have loved that? Of course I would have. I mean, there are people like that in every sport who are just engaging people that you love listening to. So, I'm lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, Charles wanted me to do this. I was glad I did it, and I owe him because, being a good listener, that's what it's got. That's what it is. Just listen.
Yeah.
Listen and draw those guys out. Have a conversation. They're great conversationalists. Chris Paul and they have great curiosity about everything. Chris Paul is just engaged on every topic. He's observant. You can sit around and talk about stuff with Chris Paul for a day, and some of it may not involve basketball at all. And so it's an honor to be asked by those guys to help them tell their stories. That's what I did. I'm an editor in both cases. I'm editing two incredibly insightful, curious, engaging, conversant people in each case.
Mr. Wilbon, this was amazing. I can't thank you enough for your time and joining me here on this show.
William, you're welcome, man. You're welcome. I hope that'll be of some value to your listeners.
Without question.
Like I said, figuring out the audience is everything. So I appreciate it. You giving me the chance to talk about that stuff, and I enjoyed it myself.
All right, sir. Thank you.
All right. Good luck. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.